So let me just click on this to get it. Okay. So we are going to dive right into advocacy in action, empowering alumni voices. And advocacy is something that is near and dear. And I've had the privilege of meeting a handful of you, not everyone, but a lot. And you will know that it is a huge passion of mine. And one of the even better things about it being a passion is that I get to talk and teach others how to do it. And I get to learn from other people. And oh, okay. So a big part of my why is this, being able to talk about where it is that I came from and how to give kind of the advocacy 101 stepping blocks is what we're going to do today. So my name is Nikki Soda. I am a woman in long-term recovery. I feel extremely grateful that I was able to get sober through residential treatment. I got sober in 2004, so I celebrated 20 years this year. And I say that because having lived experience is a big part of my story and a big part of my why as well. And so for me, it's become really what I feel kind of my life's purpose, to be able to advocate for others who are like me, because I understand what it's been like to be in the trenches. I also have an extreme fondness for residential treatment because I firmly believe that it saved my life. And so those are a couple of my whys. I do want to give a shout out to Leonard Bade, who is on this call, and he was very, very receptive and helpful when I first started out in this field. My very first behavioral health conference or collaborative was TPAS in Malibu, and he was super kind to take me under his wing and show me the ropes and introduced me to a lot of people who later became mentors in my life. And so I think that is really important. You never know what's going to happen. And so for me too, so I went to treatment. I have lived experience, and I was able to start having a job in the field, doing community outreach and alumni. And so my background is in event planning. I did corporate and nonprofit event planning before getting into behavioral health. And my husband is a therapist, and I was becoming quite envious that he was getting to be surrounded by recovery all the time. And I went to one of his holiday parties, and it was actually, I see that there's someone here from Cedar. It was a Cedar holiday party. And I was talking to Ben Cord at the party, and he's like, well, there's a job that exists that combines the two. And I'm like, you have to be kidding me. And my first job was at Harmony in Colorado, where I had the privilege of doing alumni and community outreach, and became entrenched with good mentors. And so fast forward a little bit to I joined NATAP, which is the National Association of Addiction Treatment Providers. And I was asked to help co-lead a Capitol Hill Day. And I did it with Sherry Layton, who is one of my very solid advocacy mentors. And you'll hear me talk about mentorship a lot, because for me, that is an extremely important component, especially if you're diving into something that you're not so sure about. And so I got a kick-ass mentor. We were able to co-lead this Hill Day. And when I was up on the Hill talking to legislators about issues that were near and dear to my heart, a fire really ignited in me. And I was like, this is what I want to do. And so I had the privilege of being able to go back to school, where I wanted to really kind of I look at it as an AA triangle too. I have the lived experience, I had the professional experience, and I wanted to get the education and the knowledge experience too. So I got my master's of science in addiction policy and practice, and really tried to understand what the history of drug policy is, and also get a better understanding of how laws are made, how policy works, and really the importance of policy. And so for me, that is a big part of my why, being able to advocate for those who don't have a voice and be able to just really create change. We have a saying in my household, like, if you're not going to do something to change it, don't complain about it, which has come back to bite me in the ass with my 13-year-old. But I'll tell you what, I have a strong-willed girl who will fight and argue for anything, come hell or high water. So that is a good and bad thing. So with that, we are going to dive into what the agenda for this particular webinar is. We're going to talk about what exactly is advocacy, why is it important, and how do we do it? We're going to talk about some different strategies for how you can become the most effective advocate possible. And we're going to spend some time on crafting and telling your story. That's a really important part of public policy. And as alumni coordinators, that's part of how this is so important, is you are the front face of your treatment center. You are connecting with different patients, guests, clients, whatever your particular facility calls them. You are their connection. And so you are hearing stories all the time. So you really have this incredible opportunity to be able to talk to policymakers to create change. And so with your role too, it doesn't matter if you are a person in long-term recovery, it doesn't matter what exactly your role is. What matters is that you have the knowledge and that you're able to articulate it. And so I'm just going to hopefully give you some walk-away tips to be able to advocate a little stronger for things that your organization or you personally need. So what exactly is advocacy? Advocacy is something that you firmly believe in, that you want to make a change in. So it's important to know it is a marathon. It is not a sprint. Advocacy is a process. It is not a single event. A friend of mine is on this call, Donna, and she has done a tremendous amount of advocacy, particularly with moms of those who have loved ones that have, struggled, been through unethical treatment systems. And so she has been a constant voice for a while, and she knows better than anyone how long this takes. It can sometimes be very frustrating and sometimes be never ending. But I say that, but there can be a positive outcome, and it takes persistence, and it takes optimism, and it takes getting beat down a couple of times to be able to keep fighting for it. And so I don't say that to be a Debbie Downer. I say that to be a realist and to understand that it is so worth it once it is worth the time and the effort. It happens at all levels. It can happen in your county, it can happen in your town. It can happen so much. I'm on the PTA of my daughter's middle school. Like, there's significant advocacy change that happens at that micro level. So we can look at it from micro perspectives, and then we can look at it from moving from our city to our state to regionally, to nationally, to even internationally. And we want to be sure that we know exactly what our goal is. So our goal can be something as small as, I want to ensure that there is no vaping in my daughter's middle school. To, we need to make it a federal law that there is absolutely no patient brokering in any way, shape, or form that's done in treatment centers. And so you have to be pretty clear about your goals. I would love to see a show of hands of those that have partaken in some type of advocacy effort. So whether it's in your capital, whether it is at your town hall, I would love to see a show of hands of those who have. I see a couple. Great. Well, so this is really nice because this presentation is going to be for all spectrums, for those that have advocated before and for those that this is brand new and may seem extremely daunting or overwhelming. I really love this quote. I always wondered why somebody doesn't do something about it, and then I realized that I was that somebody. And I have that on a Post-it behind my desk. If you could see my wall, that is cluttered with positive affirmations and sayings and pictures. And I firmly believe that everyone can make a difference. And that is not a Susie Sunshine statement. It is that if you believe in something and you put the effort and energy into it, you can make that change. And so advocacy has these different components in it. It's there to educate, it's there to create change, it's there to bring awareness to an issue that your legislators or your policymakers may not even have any idea about. And it's sharing our stories. And for you, alumni coordinators and alumni managers, it's being able to take alumni stories with their permission, which we'll get into, and sharing those to create change, because our stories are so powerful. I want to bring one issue with this, bringing awareness. So I live in Palm Beach County, and it seems like there's a lot of people here on this call. I do want to boast that it is 83 degrees here today. So I'm sorry for those that were in the snow in Minnesota, but Although I think it's too warm now for me to open my windows. So be careful what you wish for. So I digress. Bringing awareness. I did a Hill Day in Tallahassee last year, and we were there to talk about the Delta 8 variant that was being sold in gas stations, and there was no age on it. So anyone, you'll hear me reference my 13-year-old a lot, which she would hate, but so my 13-year-old could walk into a gas station and buy these products that have Delta 8 in it, right? Super messed up. And so we go and we have a one pager that we create to go and talk about the dangers of Delta 8 being in these products that anyone can buy. And can you guess how many of the legislators that we talked to were aware that this was even going on? Like somebody shout it out. Like of the 5 legislators that I met with, how many do you think were aware of this?
Zero.
Zero.
0. And so it's an opportunity to bring awareness for an issue that can be really important to you, that your legislators don't have any idea. Because sometimes people will think, oh, somebody else is doing this, somebody else is talking about this, but you have to understand that a lot of times it's not. And so that's a really important component of this. Advocacy happens at the state level for a number of different reasons. State level initiatives are really driven, they drive the national policy. So let's say a federal law is made, okay? That's exciting. Everybody gets really happy about it. Yay, it passed. But then it's turned down to the state to make the state have to make it happen. And so that's why it's very important to understand who your state policymakers are, your state legislators are, because they're the ones that are helping instill that change. And it even dives down a little bit deeper, but we'll get into that in a minute. So as I said, many of those federal initiatives are integrated and implemented from the state level. And then local issues that's what we're there to give. We're there to give our input so that that's then taken up to the state to be able to help with those regulations. So nobody knows state and local issues like you. So even if you're like, Nikki, I am not familiar with these, this is just a general list of issues. And you know your city, you know your state better than anybody coming in from the outside is going to know them. So you understand, or you can understand the funding sources. You can understand what some of the licensing issues are. You can listen to your alumni about some of the problems that they're having to be able to make that one of the issues. And then regulations of treatment center facilities is something that I've really dove into understanding. And so it's important for you to talk to your leadership teams to see, okay, what are some of the issues here that maybe you could help advocate from an alumni perspective level with. So the last part of this section is a preliminary step in understanding advocacy and advocating at the state level is understanding who you need to talk to. Is this issue a county issue? Is this issue with licensing the Department of Health? In Florida, the Department of Children and Families, DCF, is the licensing entity. So is it an issue with them? Is it an issue with my state rep? Or is it an issue with my state or then federal senator? And so I realize that could be a little bit daunting if you're like, Nikki, I have no idea where to even begin. The good news is there is a litany of resources to be able to help guide you to what it is that you need to, where you need to go. And so one example that I can use is that we had a town hall meeting in Palm Beach County last week to help talk about where the opioid settlement money is going. And so at first that may seem like a state issue, but what's happened is that money has come down to the county. And so I bring up that example because there's ways, and I'm going to provide everybody with a one-sheeter that's got some resources of how to be able to find out where the heck to even start or go. And one of those tools is, I mentioned I live in Florida. So every single state has a state website where you can go and be able to drill down a little bit further. So for example, on here, you can go to the florida.gov site, you type in your address, your city, and you can do this for your organization too. So I have the privilege to be able to consult for a couple different treatment centers right now. And so it's important for me to use this tool to drill down the specific organization because obviously it's different in different places. So you can type in your address, your city, and then it's going to give you something like this. This is just the Florida for a local rep. It's going to give you their phone number. it's going to, sometime, honestly, you gotta dig hard for email addresses. But I will say this, when you call an elected official, they typically have a young intern that's answering the phone that will give you the email address. And phone calls, I can't reiterate this enough, are very, very powerful. So for this example, finding your elected officials, you type in your address, it's going to give you something like this. And then it's also going to allow you to look for your state Senate, your US House of Representative, and your US Senator. I want to take a breath for a second and see if there's any questions about this or what I've talked about thus far.
I have a question, but it's more like a question for the group, but also something that maybe you can help facilitate an answer to.
Yeah.
When people think of, and maybe I'm speaking about myself, but when people think of doing advocacy or advocacy work or anything that involves kind of changing sort of the dynamic of what's happening in our communities, it always feels very daunting as an individual of, will my involvement matter? Does it actually make a difference? Because I think a lot of people don't step foot into this space at all. And particularly in the world of alumni, we're so busy trying to like build recovery communities and helping to support our existing alumni that to think kind of at a bigger level seems overwhelming. I'm curious if anybody else on the call has been able to do something similar to what Nikki's talking about. And then Nikki, can you provide feedback on how to overcome this kind of thought process around, you know, is this my place? And then, is it really going to make a difference? That kind of thing.
100%. And I would really love to hear some examples. So I encourage you guys to chime in.
Hey, this
Not
is
all, not all.
oh, sorry.
No.
I have not done this type of work, but my question is, and I guess this is more around, who's the appropriate person here. So, typically these types of conversations with state and local officials are happening with the C-suite. So I'm curious how, sort of to Gina's point, how does alumni, I think our stories support it certainly, but how do we engage even with our internal customers to make sure that they have the ammunition when they're talking to these folks?
Sure. So great question, Mary. And I think one of the first steps in it is finding an issue that your alumni is finding what that issue is. And so, yes, on one hand, C-suites, they have a different level of camaraderie when they go to advocate, but the alumni is kind of the nucleus and the heart and soul of it. And so figuring out what it is that you want to advocate for is going to be important for collecting your alumni. So does anyone have an example that we could work with of an issue that alumni have brought to you that would be something worth advocating or that we could use as an example? Did anyone have an alumni that was mistreated at a facility before or come to you with questions about everybody's alumni is good to go?
I feel like the sober living conversation comes up a lot, where there's lots of questions about the quality of sober living. And, how do we know whether or not those particular sober living programs are actually, working in accordance with, what's required for safety.
Yeah.
And that's what I hear from alumni.
Yeah. So we'll use that as an example. And so how you can integrate them, Mary, is to be able to collect stories, to get those that have been impacted, and then to find out what it is that needs to be done. So is there a city ordinance that needs to be passed? Is there a state law that needs to be passed that comes from it? So I'll use this example of in South Florida, we had a number of unscrupulous sober living that were patient brokering. By raise of hands, are you familiar? Who here is familiar with the term patient brokering? Okay. So that's good to know. So with patient brokering, and Donna is really an expert at this and may be able to chime something in as well. So with patient brokering, it can be a multitude of different things, but it's essentially human trafficking, where you're incentivizing someone to come to your facility and you're getting a kickback from that. It could also mean that you are sharing a patient, a human, with another treatment center, and you guys are doing some type of monetary exchange for said person. Could also be signing them up for insurance and getting the deductible. It is really messed up. It is illegal, but there's different states that have different regulations on it. And so in South Florida, there was a number of people who came together and they were like, we have got to put a stop to this. And so a task force was formed. And to make this story a little bit shorter, there has been alumni that were invited into this task force, not to sit on the task force, but to be advisors to it, sharing their story and saying, here's what happened. And so that helped create some of the guidelines. Okay, so we're extracting the information of lived experience of what happened. We want to make an end to it. And so, Mary, that's where alumni come into part of being part of that conversation and helping to guide what the goal needs to be, and their stories helping to change that policy. Is that helpful at all?
Yes, thank you.
So a couple of the big advocacy things that I'm seeing in DC right now is LGBTQ, forgive me for leaving that out, access rights, THC legalization versus decriminalization. We've had there's a number of states that had this on their bills right now, up for vote this recent election. Reimbursement for services is a huge one, and practice reciprocity. So I just wanted to give you guys an idea of some of the things. And so you may say, Nikki, none of these have any impact on alumni, but I think that you would find that you would be surprised. The reimbursement for services and the access to treatment, not just for LGBTQ, but for just accessing services is become a real issue. So strategies for having productive advocacy. So these are the questions that I encourage you to look at when you're looking at if you need to do something or not. Like, what change do we want to bring about or happen? How can we make them change? And who can make that change? And a lot of times, guys, these questions are so daunting that you're like, Nikki, this is so big. I don't even know where to start, or if anything can be done. And that goes back to the question that Gina said. And I firmly believe nothing, like it takes one person to say something to get that ball rolling. And so it may seem so daunting, but when you start to take it bit by bit, it's absolutely manageable. But these are important questions to ask when you're looking to see what you can change. And so strategies for this, accessing policymakers. And so understanding who it is that you need to go to, visits and events. So that's the next step of being able, once you find out who you need to talk to, looking at, all right, what is the best way? Do I need to call? Do I need to make an appointment? Do I need to create a coalition? And so I do realize that this can seem daunting, but I'm just trying to give you guys some kind of chunks and manageable bits right now. Developing your message, public advocacy, and creating a coalition, which is something we'll talk about that's really important for alumni to be able to do. Does anyone have any questions on that part? Nope.
Nikki, yeah, this
Oh,
is Leonard. I have a question. And maybe it's a follow-up to Gina. The message that's created, it seems to me that message might be a real key in terms of how do you really grab someone's attention, and what's the power behind that message? Could you speak to that a bit?
I will. It's coming up in our next section. So very good. And
Okay.
we will totally dive into that. Thank you. For our networking under the strategy umbrella, inviting representatives for your tours. This picture is actually at Alina. Shout out to Andrea. We had a senator come during one of the board meetings, so it was very timely to be able to have him sit down and learn about the needs of Alina, some of the things that are going on in the state of New Jersey, and So inviting representatives for tours, being a resource to your representatives or senators, attending town hall and community events, and creating panels. So those are a couple nice ways to do it.
Hey, Nikki, I have a question, and this just came up recently, so it was something that I don't think that the facility that I'm working with did their due diligence on, but they did invite a legislator to come and tour their facility, and he was incredibly inappropriate. He
Oh,
had real issues with the LGBTQ community, the trans community. He was very verbal about it. He just felt like, it was almost like he didn't really understand the nuances of the program and what was being offered. How do you go about making sure that when you're inviting a legislator to your facility and your staff is going to be interacting with them, that it's somebody that's actually going to be invested in understanding what you're doing versus just coming to kind of, maybe he was, and I think in this case, it could have been a one-off that he was doing somebody a favor, but have you ever had a situation like that? And how do we kind of head that off?
sure. So I personally have not, but I do extensive research before inviting a state rep or a senator onto a facility. With the administration change, I'm going to be very PC with this, but it's going to be helpful for you to look through social media. So look at what they've been tweeting, um, and to look at bills that they've supported or they've said no to. And so, Gina, this could have been an example too by going back through that representative's history, because it is very transparent to be able to see bills that they've supported, or bills that they've said no to. And so I would think that some simple background check, no disrespect to the facility that invited this person, would have seen like, this person is not an ally of LGBTQ. We need to if this person absolutely needed to come, we need to form our tour in an informative, educational way. We need to look at some of the things that he has said yes to that may be more aligned with us. But we need to use this as an opportunity too to share what we're doing. And I'm not saying you're going to change someone's mind on the first, but I am saying that I have had experiences where someone comes in with some mindset and they sit down, and we'll use me for example. I drank and drugged for 7 years every day. And so a lot of times if you sit down with me, a senator or representative is going to be like, people judge, right? And so it's an opportunity to educate. And there's a lot of CEOs that are in recovery too. So you get a representative to sit down, even your alumni, you guys see them firsthand. There is really special people. And so it's an opportunity to educate, but do your due diligence. You don't want to, you know, do your due diligence, especially now.
Yeah, thank you.
So the tools that we have, that each of us on this call have, we have lived experience, whether or not you're in recovery or not, you have experience of working in a treatment facility or within an organization that deals specifically with substance use disorder. So you have the knowledge within you to be able to be a change agent. Your alumni are critical pieces of constituents. So they're people that vote. They are people with lived experience. And more than likely, they've got jobs in all different sectors. And so I know, I had the privilege of going to Ashley's alumni event where they had over 1,000 alumni back on campus. And so you look at that there is everything from, doctors, lawyers, mechanics, like you have all of these different experiences that are helpful for different issues that you want to move forward. You have data, and that is a really, really important component too, that you should, I would hope majority of you are collecting some type of data, and you have that to be able to go to the table with as well. And last but not least, a tool that you have is social media. So you can support different bills or different initiatives that are coming through. Does anyone have an example of something that's happened in their state that's had an impact on their treatment, on their treatment center? Was there any legislation that was passed this year that you saw that had an impact? So Well, so the decriminalization of marijuana could be one, that in Florida, it was not passed, and so it was not made legal. So social media is a way to elevate your stance with approval of your organization. So let me put that in big, bold disclaimer, because your beliefs may be different than what your treatment center is. It should be a bipartisan, and bipartisan means that it's both ways. It's both Republican and Democrat. And but if there is something that is if there is something that is very strong, and I wish I had an example right off the top of my head to support your alumni and your organization, social media is a great way to tag your legislators or your city officials and be able to be like, this is a big deal, and they pay attention. And it may not specifically be them, but they've got some staffers who that is their sole job to look at that. Okay, we're gonna skip over that. We're gonna get into storytelling. So this is the most important part, I think, of this presentation, and it is talking about personal stories, either for yourself or for your alumni. And they're really a powerful tool, guys, to be able to help move policy forward. It is a way to connect, it's a way to make impact, and it's a way for policymakers to stop and listen. And our personal stories, so they really need to, so let's say you have a goal in mind. Oh, not skipping over that one. You have a particular goal in mind that you want to collect alumni stories for, and you want to be able to put them together. Or let's say, for example, you have a Hill Day in, there's someone from Driftwood. So let's say you have your Austin Hill Day is in March, and I think that TAP organizes it, right? Yeah. Yes. Yeah, thumbs up. And actually my first Hill Day was in Austin. And so I was able to go, and so using that for an example, let's say you have that there's an issue that's on the ballot that you are going to go to the Hill, meaning to the Capitol, and advocate for. And so being able to bring a few of your alumni to share their personal stories is an incredibly impactful way to get your issue across. And so why does this do this? It lends credibility to the problem or the solution. And so let's say, just for example, that you have a number of unethical sober livings in Austin. Let's just use that as an example. And so you're wanting to pass a bill that says, all right, we are cracking down. There's going to be penalties if you get caught. We are going to create a regulatory entity that comes in and monitors and checks sober living. That may already be in existence. I'm just using that as an example. And then you have some alumni who went through some of these really crappy sober livings and have firsthand experience. That is the type of information that you want to gather. And if they feel comfortable being able to share that, because this way you're putting a human face on the problem and you're putting a human face on the solution. So let's say this alumni had a really crappy sober living experience, and then they came to Driftwood and they had a really good experience, and now they've got a year of recovery under their belt. That is taking that story, showing what the problem is, a solution that came about, and then what you're proposing as the even bigger solution. You're helping others to identify a problem, or well, that doesn't make sense. Ignore that bullet point. You're stirring compassion within your legislators. And so it's a way to pull on the heartstrings, not in an insincere way, but you are again, having that face there. And so you're sitting right in front of them talking about, this happened to me, or this happened to my loved one, or this happened to my alumni, and being able to really instill that, like, this is a legit issue. You know, you're not handing a brochure with a story with a stock photo on it. You're using a real life example. And what essentially you want to do is you want to move them into action to solve the problem and to help support whatever your solution is. Does anyone have any questions about that? Does that make sense? So when you are going and when you're gathering stories from your alumni, and whether you're deciding to do something as big as going to the Hill, or if you're gathering things to send an email, you want to consider which stories or which personal accounts you want to use. And so with this, you want to look at, all right, what uses the best example? What's the most impactful? And then who are the best people to tell their stories? So how many of you have alumni that really like to talk to you and tell story after story after story? Does anyone have any of those? Yeah. So you want to be selective on which alumni you pick to come and represent the issue. And so that's not being mean. That's just being cognizant of who is going to be able to share their story and in an authentic way, but like not go off the rails or, kind of stay within the parameters of what you want to do, being goal oriented. And the ways that you do that is you pick those that have compelling stories, but that would be willing to prepare a little bit, that can keep their story brief. I don't know about you, but I have a couple of friends that it's like, oh my God, please get to the point. And so you have to be able to rein that in. And you want to include the important details that keeps the audience, that keep your legislator or your policymaker tuned in. And it needs to be to the point, and there needs to be a goal, and there needs to be an action point. I've been to a couple of Hill days where they've brought massive amounts of people in to talk about their story. And it's like, that's great. What is the action step? And when there's no action step, guys, that time is completely lost. And so that goes for, that's a good example. Ms. Baskin, do you have a question? I'd be happy to answer it. Maybe you were just raising your hand about an alumni.
Yes, I was raising my hand about, I'm
Yeah.
sorry. I didn't know it didn't go down.
Don't be sorry at all. I do the same thing.
I have a question. How much time do people have with legislators if they were to go and meet with folks? Do they get like 5 minutes? Do they get 10 minutes? What does that number look like?
Great question. And so typically, in my experience, the time allotments have been anywhere from 10 minutes to 30 minutes if they dig your story and if they become interested and find the time. What you will find, though, is that once you are given a time, you need to be there early. You need to be prepared for that representative to not actually be there, for it to be a staffer. And you have to be concise, to the point, and ready to go. So you also need to be very, very prepared, because when you get in there, they're like, okay, you have to remember too, they're seeing people after people after people. So that's part of what makes personal stories so important, because you're able to make much more of a mark than if you have a lobbyist come in who's got 3 brochures that's like, hey, here's my thing. Here's how we want you to vote. Please vote this way. So when you have alumni, or if you guys are going yourself, that's so much more impactful than doing it the other way. But Gina, I have been where they've been running very late and they meet me out in the hall and they're like, you've got 5 minutes, go.
Mhm.
So you just have to go with the flow. And that makes follow-up very, very, very important.
Thank you. And you have about 4 minutes left.
Awesome. Okay. So be cautious and responsible of the stories. This goes without saying, but you never assume. You have got to have permission from your alumni to be able to use their stories. And so that's something you want to be very cognizant and cautious about. You don't want to share anything that they don't feel comfortable with, or that they aren't willing to share. And never change a person's story. So don't feel like, if we just modified this a little bit, it might feel better. Don't ever do that. And again, that seems like something of common sense, but I've learned that you need to say that. Data. So this is really, really important. This is an important takeaway, guys, because personal stories are so important, but they really don't mean shit if you don't have data to back it up. So forgive my bluntness, but you need to be able to have some research and some facts. So that's great if, John Smith has this compelling, heartbreaking story that moves somebody to tears. If you don't have data and numbers for what it is that you're asking for, you're more than likely not going to get it. And so it's so important to blend the two. Tips for effective talking points. We've talked about this a little bit. Keeping it brief, remembering your goal, personalizing your points, being specific, and providing a reason for the action. And a really important takeaway, guys, is to where it really impacts legislators is when you're talking about their constituents and the people that vote for them. Because there's two things that really impact legislators: money and votes. So just remember that. You can make a difference. And so this goes back to the one person. All of these different House bills had huge impacts and started from a small group of people who said, we need some change. This is not right. We need some change. And so you can make it, you can make a difference. Write that on a Post-it. And for those who have positive affirmations. And so measuring the impact of advocacy, we're just briefly going to go through this. I mean, this is what can happen. You get change in institutional policies. Here now, patient brokering became a law. So that House Bill 807 had a direct impact in penalties for those who patient brokered. You get a change in public attitudes because once you can do, once social media is a very powerful tool. You can change changes in the political process or system. Now that's a very big daunting one, but that's an advocacy outcome. And then increased power and influence from your organization, from the coalition that you belong to. So that can be on a smaller or bigger scale. So advocacy is within all of us, and it's finding what you are. It's finding what needs to be changed and believing that you can do it and engaging your community. And TPAS is a wonderful, wonderful community to be able, if you have something in your state, I mean, there was like 6 people on this call in Florida. So if there's an issue that you hear about, it starts with those phone calls or with those group emails. It starts with tapping into TPAS community and saying like, hey, this issue is really messed up. Is anybody else dealing with this? And then getting more people to come on and getting that ball rolling. And I want to say this too, for those that might be like, well, I don't know if I can get our leadership on board with advocacy. There's so many benefits to it, increasing brand awareness, getting those legislators on your property to talk to your CEO can be really impactful. But it also shows your alumni that you give a shit. Pardon my cursing, but if there's an issue that they come to you and they're like, this is, if it's a legitimate issue, you can have the tools to be like, all right, here's some steps we can do. And that shows them, they're like, oh my gosh, all right, well, Michael really cares. And so it's something that can really make a difference and ultimately can generate an ROI, although that's the last part that I want to say on this, but that's what your leadership sometimes wants to hear. So I'm going to provide, Gina's going to send a handout to you guys that has a list of some of the action steps. Here's my cell phone number for anybody who wants to take it down. I am more than happy to talk about advocacy and to give you tips and to share my experience. And that's, as an alumni of a treatment center and somebody who wholeheartedly believes that we can make a difference, like I will be your biggest cheerleader. So.
Thank you so much, Nikki. Really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us about advocacy, which oftentimes feels overwhelming, but if you break it down the way that she's talked about it, I think it's incredibly doable. It's also, you might find that this can be an amazing activity or engagement opportunity for your alumni to be more involved. So we always look at ways that we can involve our alumni in things, and obviously this could be a valuable resource for them to get more involved. So if you're interested in learning more, please be sure to reach out to Nikki. Also, you will be getting a handout from her. And then I believe Nikki, in working with us, is going to help us develop an advocacy guidebook or handbook that we can use through TPAS.
A toolkit. And so coming in 2025, we're going to have an alumni advocacy toolkit. Yeah. We're renaming it toolkit. That's going to have step-by-step breakdowns of easy to use, manageable components. But Gina, that's a really good thing that you could have a great alumni event if there is an advocacy issue that you see reoccurring in your area, to be able to get alumni involved and get some real alumni champions to step up and give them an opportunity to give back and help you.
Perfect. All right, well, it's good to see everybody again. Thank you so much for joining us today. We will see you in 2025 on January 8th. Be sure to check out the TPAS community platform for our upcoming events. And if you're going to be able to make the idea exchange next week, we'll see you then. Thank you again, Nikki, for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.
All right.
Happy holidays.
Ready?
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. It was great.